Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Trent Blizzard. I'm the president of NAMA, and I'm excited to welcome Jeff Chilton here today to talk about cultivation, identification, and quality control of functional mushroom products. It promises to be a very informative webinar for us that has been brought to us by the Medicinal Mushroom Committee. So thank you to the Medicinal Mushroom Committee for bringing Jeff to us today. We're out, both of us, on the West Coast here, enjoying the sunny weather, which we haven't seen in a while. We were just talking about that before the webinar started, how exciting it is to get the sunshine. Now, let me read to you a little bit about Jeff. He studied ethno-mycology at the University of Washington in the late 60s. And in 1973, he began a 10-year career as a large-scale commercial mushroom grower. So I'm guessing that ended in about the mid 80s. And maybe coincidental with it ending, he's the co-author of The Mushroom Cultivator, which was published in 83. In 89, he established Namex, the first company to supply medicinal mushroom extracts to the nutritional supplements industry. In 97, he organized the first organic certification workshop for mushroom production in China. And Jeff is the founding member of the World Society of Mushroom Biology and Mushroom Products in 1994, and a member of the International Society of Mushroom Science. I mean, it's so exciting to have somebody with your kind of international reputation here speaking to us today, Jeff. Now I'll finish to say Namex extracts are used by many supplement and food companies and are noted for their high quality based on scientific analysis of their active compounds. So welcome, Jeff. I'm going to turn this over to you. I'll stop the sharing of my screen and let you take over, and I will bow out here as you begin your presentation. So welcome.
Very good. Thank you, Trent. And let me just get the screen up there going. And first of all, just a little bit extra about the bio, which is interesting. This book here was very, very instrumental in my mushroom career. And I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I went to the University of Washington in the late 60s. That was quite a special time, really. And we were doing a lot of interesting work in shamanism, which is part of my study in anthropology. And while I was there, I was actually able to take a mycology course from Dr. Daniel Stuntz. And the fact of the matter is there are very few universities that even have anyone to teach a mycology class. So I was really fortunate at that point in time. And one of the interesting things about it was that we had psychoactive mushrooms growing on campus, and one of them ended up being actually named after Professor Stuntz, and that's Psilocybe stuntzii. After university, I spent a year and a half in Oaxaca, I learned a lot about through these books, Mushroom Russia and History by Gordon Wasson, and I studied these two books religiously. I could only read them in the rare books room of the University of Washington Library, and I'd go in there, I'd sign in, I'd sit down at a table, they would go and get these books, a 2-volume set, bring it, lay it down on the table in front of me, and I was able to look at them. You couldn't take them away, or you couldn't do anything other than copy some of the information out of them, and they were very important. After university, I spent a year and a half in Oaxaca, Mexico, actually looking for these different psilocybe mushrooms down in Oaxaca State. When I got back, I started work at a mushroom farm in Olympia, Washington, Oyster Mushroom Farm, and I was there for the next 10 years, literally living with mushrooms. Now, let's just see here. Why is it? There we go. Now, everybody knows that mushrooms are healthy foods, and I put this up here because I just want to speak to the fact that every species has a unique profile, nutritional and functional. And some of the important parts about that is mushrooms are really high in fiber, 7 to 25%, and also primarily carbohydrate, 35 to 80%. But these carbohydrates are very slow acting carbohydrates. They're not starch. Mannitol is one of the major ones, and so is beta glucan. And the other thing about mushrooms is they're very low in calories. And when I was at the mushroom farm in the 70s, classical nutritionists said mushrooms have no food value. Can you imagine? Well, the reason was that they're low in calories, and if you don't have calories, it's kind of like, well, what's the point? Um, I started my company in 1989, and my company Namex, and one of the things that I did in 1989 was go to a mushroom conference in China. 1989 it was the International Society for Mushroom Science. This is another conference over there. 1994, a shiitake mushroom conference. So all through the 90s, I traveled in China, visiting farms, factories, visiting research institutes, and it convinced me that China was really the future, not only for just mushroom growing in general, but for my business. And it's interesting to think that today China produces 90% of the world's mushrooms. And you can see by the table there that in 1978, they only had 5%. But due to the fact of supportive agricultural research institutes, abundant agricultural wastes, decentralized small growers, and essentially a government that was really supporting mushroom growing as something for China as a new business. By 2011, more than 85% of the world's mushrooms were coming out of China. And something that I learned just recently, which I thought was so very interesting, was that mushroom cultivation in China, the production value ranks number 5 after grain, vegetable, fruit, and edible oil plantations, greater than sugar, cotton, or tobacco. And if you look at the mushroom production in 2020, shiitake, they grow over 10 million tons of shiitake. And right now, shiitake is the number 1 cultivated mushroom in the world. And then you can see the other species, Pleurotus through Pleurotus oryngii, all of them over 1 million tons a year. And the part of the reason too for the government supporting mushroom cultivation so strongly was the fact that they had a poverty alleviation program, and the earnings in mushroom cultivation was 10 times higher than if you were growing rice or corn. Now, the other part of it for China is that that's where a lot of new cultivars are being developed and grown. And in the last 20 years, they have learned how to grow morels, the cauliflower mushroom, and believe it or not, they now can cultivate the caterpillar fungus, Ophiocordyceps sinensis. And I also read that they've got cultivar trials going on right now for the pine mushroom and the king boletus, and that really, I'm just amazed about that. The other thing that I just learned, which was so odd, I've always thought that, okay, China and the people there have eaten a lot of mushrooms for forever. Well, they've eaten certainly a lot of wild mushrooms, but per capita consumption in 2005 was 0.5 kilos, and that's really low. But the reason was the price of mushrooms was too high. And today, now that they're growing so many mushrooms, the per capita consumption has reached 64 kilos. And so, due to the fact of all of the cultivation that's going on now and all of the mushrooms, the cost of which are quite cheap now in China, there's a lot more of the mushrooms being eaten. And whenever I'm over there, I think we have mushrooms at almost certainly every dinner and sometimes even during lunch. So again, China produces 90% of the world's mushrooms. They have abundant agricultural waste, decentralized small growers, a supportive agriculture and research institute. So sorry, did that already. Um, Mushrooms now have been cultivated for over 800 years, and generally what we're trying to do with cultivation is mimic natural environmental conditions and also the substrate materials. So, for example, wood decomposers will grow on wood logs, sawdust or straw. Pasture mushrooms will grow on either composted cereal straws, bagasse, corn cobs, animal manures at times. But I people have, well, so how do you grow mushrooms? It's like there are no seeds to grow mushrooms. So what do we do? Well, mushroom growing seed is actually a live culture of pure mycelium. And we can get that mycelium either from a tissue from a fresh mushroom or from the germination of spores. So we will grow out the mycelium in plates. We ultimately will take sectors and develop something that ultimately will produce a mushroom. And ultimately, when you're doing this and developing a cultivar, you're looking for primarily a high yielding cultivar. And now, in order to start the process, we'll take that mycelium and we will put it on a carrier material, which can be grain, sawdust, or wooden dowels, and that material is called mushroom spawn. There are three major spawn types. There is a grain spawn, sawdust spawn, and wooden dowel spawn. And the way spawn is made is you're basically soaking these materials to about a 50% moisture content. You're sterilizing them for 90 minutes. You're inoculating them with live mycelium. And then after 2 to 4 weeks, they're actually ready to be planted in a substrate. And the key with spawn is you want something that can provide you with multiple points of inoculation. So you want something that will mix through the entire substrate and then grow through it very quickly, because that's a point in the cultivation process that is very sensitive to molds and other contaminants. Now, another way and another type of spawn that is used in some types of growing is liquid spawn. And this just shows you the pellets that are formed when we create a liquid mycelium in the lab. Now, all spawn is grown in a sterile lab environment, and this is just an indication and shows you how it looks. Now, agaricus grows on a compost. A lot of people think agaricus grows on manure. It doesn't. It grows on a compost basically made with straw, which is broken down by microbial fermentation. Agaricus is mainly cultivated in beds, often stacked 6 high in enclosed rooms that are climate controlled. In the West, we tend to have large warehouses. Everything is climate controlled. We control the temperature, the humidity, the airflow. So we give them the optimum conditions for their growth. In the 1970s, when I was at Ostrom's mushroom farms in Olympia, we had a Japanese scientist there, Dr. Urayama, and he was growing shiitake, oyster mushroom, and enoki take. This is in the 70s, at a time when very few other mushrooms were actually being cultivated in the United States. And this is a traditional way of growing shiitake, where you've got spawn grown on dowels. The spawn is then these dowels are tapped into these logs. And in this case, these are oak logs, and they probably put about 15 to 20 of these dowels spaced regularly on these logs. It's incubated, and in this case, we've got a greenhouse that it's not very climate controlled, but we can at least control the moisture content. And then in 1978, we got the first crop of shiitake, and that was actually then marketed into the Seattle market. And the interesting part about this was actually the first fresh shiitake that was put into a major market in the United States. But what happened was that nobody really wanted to buy them. And the feedback they got was that the shiitake were too strong tasting, which I find rather interesting. But to me, shiitake is my favorite mushroom, and it was really a big shock. And that ended the shiitake growing at Ostrom's. Now, in China, the way mushrooms are grown is on a standardized sawdust log that is sterilized. It's a sawdust bran normally, and having this standardized log is really important for their industry, because what that means is that companies, very specific companies, can create these substrates which they then will sell to the growers. In this case, you can see where the spawn has been pressed into each log in 4 different locations, and it's spawn running here in this open air area. It will also be put on shelves like this, and the spawn will continue to run here, and then ultimately they will grow the shiitake mushrooms on these shelves like this. This is a farm with wooden shelves, but what they've done here now is they have stripped off the plastic bag, and they've opened it up for the shiitake mushrooms to grow. And this, the interesting part about all of the growing in China is that the growers that we use, they're using all natural conditions. Nothing is grown indoors. It's all grown in outdoor shade houses. They grow the mushrooms and fruit them at a point in the year when the temperatures are perfect for that mushroom. Reishi mushroom they harvest in early September while it's still warm. Shiitake, maitake, they'll harvest in early November when it's much cooler, because they need cooler temperatures. And then something like lion's mane or tremella will be harvested in December, and again with much cooler temperatures. So everything is really moved along with the seasons. And again, it's a very natural method of growing mushrooms. This is just a wonderful little log that had a lot of mushrooms growing off it. And this is what a house that's really in peak production looks like. Here's a harvester, and she's just going down the aisles. She'll pull a log off the shelf, and she'll pull the mushrooms off, and she'll place them in her basket. And this is what it'll look like. And what happens now is that these mushrooms will go to a processing station where they will cut the ends off the mushrooms. They don't want the substrate that adheres. And also shiitake stalks generally are pretty tough. So they'll clip it down to maybe there's only a 2-inch stalk left on the mushroom. It used to be that most of these mushrooms in China were sun dried. So they would just put them on racks out in the sun. And there were some times where you could be driving down the back roads in China, and you would see shiitake mushrooms lining the roads really on these racks, drying out. Today, they're really moving towards these internal forced air dryers. This here is the shiitake mushroom temple. And also, what's really interesting about this particular spot is that wooden bridge. And this particular county in China is called the Mushroom County of China. And it has approximately 400 of these bridges, these old wooden bridges. And it's become really a major cultural item. But this temple, which is essentially a Buddhist temple, it has a statue on the stage, so to speak. And this is a statue of the man who first initiated shiitake cultivation in the 12th century, Wu Songong. And he is up on the stage there. He's got a shiitake mushroom in his hand, and he's got a stick in the other. And the original cultivation of shiitake, which was again on logs, in order to make them fruit, one of the methods they had was beating on the logs with a stick like that. Now, whether or not that had any effect or not, I'm not sure, but that's what he has in his hand and what he's doing. Now, we grow our reishi mushroom on farms deep in the mountains, and again, it's mostly under a shade cloth. The key is mushrooms need light to develop, but you don't want such direct sunlight that it's going to lower the humidity or dry your mushrooms out. Under that shade cloth is a plastic greenhouse like this one here, and you can see by all of the vegetation in there that it's not exactly being trying to keep the vegetation down. And what's happening here is that the wood log that they've grown through with mycelium gets buried in the earth, and each log is going to produce one mushroom. So underneath here, we've got all sorts of wood logs. In this particular farm, which I visited in 1996, each one of these mushrooms is growing on a very small 6 inches tall wood log. And that's why if you look at them, you can see they're all in beautiful rows. They're spaced perfectly. So they've figured out the size of the mature mushroom, and then they put the logs in a almost like a ditch and cover them all with earth, and then the mushroom actually starts to grow coming out of that earth, and you end up with that. And this gives you an idea here of the size of this wood log that it's growing from, and essentially it's one mushroom per log. Now, what's happened since I started going to China in 1989 is as the industry moves forward, they modernize a lot of what they're doing. This is a greenhouse that we visited, and it's one of the newer types of growing environments where they're actually using a metal frame greenhouse, plastic covers, much like we have, and you'll see more often in the West. Now, one of the interesting new products in China are reishi mushroom spores. And believe it or not, they're selling spores, but what they do to spores is they have a process where they crack the spore, and it's almost like going through a couple of rollers to crack them, and then they have scientists and businesses that talk about the benefits of reishi mushroom spores. I personally don't subscribe to that. Mostly inside a fungal spore, we've got a lot of fatty acids and lipids, which they need to germinate. But this is an interesting way to collect spores. And believe it or not, one mushroom like this reishi mushroom, which has about 2 inches worth of spores on its cap, besides what's down in the bag, one mushroom can produce as much as 400 grams of spores. And this is what it looks like first. And this is that it's shrouded. They've got a newspaper on top, but the mushroom itself is shrouded. And what's really interesting is that while it's in that configuration, they will actually have reishi mushrooms that will grow off of a reishi mushroom. So it will regenerate itself, pin along the edges, which I think is due to moisture and possibly just light. And so it will start to regrow from the edge of the cap. And once they're finished, and that particular farm, they're using very irregular logs that they've buried. But what they do when they've finished is they dig those up and they put them out into the land around it and dry them out and actually use them as fuel. And that's one of the things I found about China is they don't really waste a lot. Now, this is an interesting Ganoderma sinensis, which they have manipulated in such a way that each one of those light colored areas is the tip of a stem. So they've got multiple stems that they have created from this one point coming out of this wood substrate. And that's one of the things I find very fascinating about mushrooms, is that you can actually manipulate the way they grow quite easily. This is maitake. In the upper left, that's a young maitake, and then in the lower right is the mature maitake, and this is just showing the stages of growth. And this is maitake production, and they're not really doing it on shelves that I've seen. Instead, they will lay these out on the ground, and what they're really after is they're after one major maitake cluster, which ultimately means there's less time invested in harvesting. And it's really interesting because the way they do this is they will put two of these sawdust logs together, open them up in the very center, and then the mushroom, when it comes out, it will use the nutrients from both logs to produce this one very nice, very large maitake. And again, in terms of harvest, this makes harvesting so much easier, because instead of harvesting multiple mushrooms off of a block, you're just harvesting one large mushroom. Now, in some cases, they will be growing mushrooms right out in the open without any cover, any greenhouse. And these wood ear bags will be incubated somewhere, maybe in a greenhouse somewhere, but in the fall, they will bring them all out and they will put them in this type of configuration just out in an open field. And that, I find that fascinating that they can do this. But the fact is, I think with the wood ear, due to its morphology being like a jelly fungus, then I think it's just more resistant to sun and environmental conditions. So this is right now, they've got it out and they're harvesting it. And we don't see wood ear much over here. It hasn't really reached us for, you might say obvious reasons, but it's actually quite a delicious mushroom. And part of its value is in the fact of its texture. It's quite a chewy mushroom, but quite an interesting edible. This is tremella, and again, you can see they've got a log, and they've directed the mushrooms to come out at 3 locations. So what they end up with here are 3 nice sized mushrooms. And again, they don't need the army of harvesters that are necessary for most mushroom cultivation. This is Hericium, the lion's mane, and it's growing on shelves, again, off the sawdust logs. And they've done pretty much the same thing here. It is growing from 3 different locations on this log, and Hericium likes cooler temperatures. This farm here, we visited it in right around the 1st of December, and it was decidedly cool maybe it was somewhere around 15 degrees Celsius in this house, and you can see she's got a puffer jacket on, and so it is cool in this house. She's even got gloves on, and in a lot of the farms they'll have the plastic totes that they'll put the mushrooms in. I found this basket very beautiful, that here on this small lion's mane farm they were using a local basket to put the lion's mane they were picking into. Now this is Cordyceps sinensis as of 1988, and this is a fresh cordyceps that was harvested by some of my associates over there, and they harvested it on a trip up to Tibet. And cordyceps is really an interesting mushroom, so to speak, but it's not something that gets sold in the U.S. supplement market, primarily because it's just too expensive. Cordyceps, at last that I heard, was valued at somewhere around $15,000 a dried kilogram. So most people in China do not eat this mushroom. Instead, they will gift it. They can actually, one of the things that's interesting is they will turn these into some very interesting looking products that they will sell. And again, these are primarily given away as gifts. Now, I've got I just want to talk a little bit of wild versus cultivated. And I know there's some people that commercialize wild mushrooms, and on a small scale, that's, I understand that, but we really try to stay away from any kind of wild crafting. And one of the problems is that it can often lead to the destruction of the habitat, especially if you get organized groups going out and going through the woods. And one of the things that happens, it does distort a local economy. And this absolutely happened up in Tibet, where people had to start to protect their local cordyceps grounds. And it even led to a incident probably about 20 years ago, where a local group kicked out another group that had entered their territory, and ultimately 6 people were killed. So that is something, that's just, doesn't happen here very often, but I know there are times on the West Coast where there have been incidents. Certainly that was years ago. I don't know about now, but again, it really had an effect on the local economy up there. And a lot of people say, well, that's positive, but in my opinion, it's not so positive for a number of reasons. But it also removes mushrooms from local areas to the detriment of the local population. So where we have our offices in Roberts Creek, Canada, we have a beautiful area up behind us on the mountain that is second growth conifer trees. And we have a lot of pine mushrooms up there. We have chanterelles, and it's difficult when people sweep in and organized way and go up through there and start to harvest in season. The nice thing about cultivation is it allows for species to be marketed all year. And look, mushroom cultivation is a wonderful way to process agricultural waste and turn it into a high value product. Here is probably one of the most interesting things that I can imagine, and that is they can cultivate cordyceps now. These are cultivated Ophiocordyceps sinensis. They actually found a way to do it, and that was, of course, to grow the caterpillar and then find a way to actually inoculate it. And I don't know the process very well. I'm sure it's highly basically proprietary. The interesting thing, though, about cordyceps that I've been contemplating too is that the caterpillar is actually a sclerotia, because it's completely full of mycelium. So it's a sclerotia. It's underground, which makes sense. Okay, sclerotia, it's a hard mass of mycelia inside the caterpillar, and then of course the small fruiting body coming out of the head. We grow Cordyceps militaris, and Cordyceps militaris has adapted very well to cultivation. It's a more warm temperature mushroom. The thing with Ophiocordyceps sinensis is that it grows in very cold climates, and that always made it difficult for cultivation. So I'm not sure exactly how they learned to do it or how they developed the process over there in China, but we grow Cordyceps militaris. The beauty of this is that it's not worth $15,000 a kilo. We can grow it large quantities and deliver this, and it has all the same benefits of Ophiocordyceps sinensis. The other thing about Cordyceps militaris, it is a delicious edible mushroom. Now, we had a 5-year program to cultivate turkey tail mushrooms because that was one of the mushrooms that we have been wildcrafting in China to create our turkey tail extracts. And the big problem was everybody looked at turkey tail and thought, you know what, there's small little mushrooms. It's going to be a harvesting nightmare. And so finally, when we found somebody and there was a strain that was developed to grow well, and last year was the second year that we've been cultivating it, and we grew 16 dried tons of turkey tail. And we're so thrilled about that after, and again, just having to wildcraft. And again, one of the issues about wildcrafting is that when you've got wildcrafters out there and it's not for edible purposes, well, they can harvest turkey tail that is any particular age, old, new, whatever, and they would have a very different profile of the active compounds in them. Some of them might be just in really bad shape, but they'll just out there harvest it all, and gets mixed in. And with a small turkey tail, and you can imagine having bags and bags and bags of turkey tail, and it mostly looks the same. And so it really, the quality of wildcrafted material often is not good. And with turkey tail, now that we can cultivate it, we have a material that is a very high quality all the time. Now, there are new mushroom farms, not new to Japan. This was a method to grow mushrooms in Japan called bottle culture. And it's a really interesting method. It's highly mechanized. It starts by using liquid spawn. So you sterilize water, nutrient water. Ultimately, you inoculate it with a mycelium culture, and you will incubate it until it's filled with mycelium, and then you can use it as spawn. And this is what it looks like in a farm, a new farm that uses these bottles. And you just think, God, growing them out at small bottles, that just seems so, I don't know, difficult, but it's not. It's actually very easy. They go into a filling machine, which fills every bottle with the sawdust substrate. It puts a cap on them. They move out. You stack them up. It goes into an autoclave. Once it's sterilized, it goes into this clean room. They put it on the line. It goes down the line. And as it passes, they put before they sterilize it, the machines will put a hole right down the center of that bottled substrate. So when it goes through this line, they will inject the liquid spawn into the bottle, and it will grow out quite quickly from the center of the bottle to the sides. You can see they can stack these up for incubation. Here it is completely grown through. And then ultimately, once they reach a certain point, they will put it into a grow room with a lower temperature, and you've got pins growing right out of that small surface there. And this in fact is Pleurotus oryngii. And not only that, they've got these, all the bottles are in the plastic tray. They're on shelving here that you can move around. It's on wheels. So it's a very easily mechanized and very, I guess, economical way to grow mushrooms. And in this case, with Pleurotus oryngii, it's interesting. I don't know if you've got them in your marketplace. It's an absolutely delicious mushroom. But what they do is they just will prune them off the top where they're coming out and just grow two mushrooms primarily. So when you see oryngii in the stores, normally it'll be a package of maybe 4 or 5 mushrooms that look just like this. Here it shows growing a type of what we'd call shimeji mushroom, and they're just putting these, and they're all growing them inside houses on standardized shelving, but everything here gets moved around by conveyor on these farms. And the beauty of this system is actually nobody ever has to go into one of those rooms to harvest a mushroom. It's not, you don't have to have an army of harvesters going in there. No, it's like everything is growing up at the same time. When you're cultivating agaricus or even shiitake, when you're harvesting, you're picking only the ones that are mature, and you're coming back a second time or even a third time to then pick the next mushroom that is mature, and that might be the next day or 2 days later. In this case, they're harvesting everything at once. All they do here when it comes into this packing room is they come in, they twist the whole bunch off the top, they cut off the bottom, which has substrate attached, and then they start to put them into the retail conveyor or a container, which actually then gets the overwrap on top. So it comes out, there's the package, and goes right into the box, which goes then right into the cooler, and the next day it goes off to the wholesaler or the stores. So it's a very, very practical, economic way to do it. Oftentimes, if you're picking mushrooms, you're picking them into the tote. The tote then goes to a basic, that night it's got to be in a cooler. The next day it comes out, you snip the bottom off of it, or that then you send it off maybe to the packing room, and then they'll pack it and they'll sort it. And no, this is so very simple and economic, this way of growing. Now, one of the things I was talking about earlier is the fact that they have developed new cultivars. And this is a cauliflower mushroom that I saw the presentation at the conference in 2019. I love the cauliflower mushrooms, delicious mushroom. The fact that now they can cultivate it is just another one of those wonderful achievements that they've done over there. And this is what it looks like, again, in shelves, in these plastic containers, in bottles. And interesting thing I found about this too is it looks like they're using a LED string light for growing these indoors. Now, so just to sum up what we've just gone through, mushrooms are cultivated by starting either with spores or mushroom tissue. We're developing a pure mycelium culture, a cultivar. Ultimately, we want to make spawn with that mycelium, which we can put on a dowel, on sterile grain or sterile sawdust, or even liquid. And that ultimately we will inject or plant and mix it up into some type of substrate, whether it's a wood log, a compost, or a sawdust log. That's how mushrooms are cultivated. I'm so happy that I got this picture, but this was the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China in 1997. And my company has been organically certified since 1992. And I totally believe in organic certification and in organic products, and eating fruits or vegetables that aren't loaded with chemicals. This workshop started organic mushroom production in China for mushrooms. And 3 years later, we had our first organic mushrooms, and they're certified by high quality Australian certifiers. Now, moving into functional mushrooms, and one of the things that I've done in the last few years, I'm moving away from talking about medicinal mushrooms and talking more about functional mushrooms. But medicinal is fine. I don't mind that. But when you're talking about medicines, the government starts to get a little bit, uneasy. And so the other part of it is now we've got psilocybin mushrooms out there, and they're what I would call maybe seriously medicinal, especially when they're using it for mental health issues. So I'll talk about them now as functional mushrooms. And in the functional mushroom industry, we have spores, we have mushrooms, we have pure mycelium, and in China they manufacture thousands of tons of mycelium through liquid fermentation. We have sclerotia, we have chaga, and today in the United States we have products which I call mycelium on grain, and essentially it's no different than the spawn process. They're basically companies are growing mushroom spawn and then ultimately selling it and oftentimes calling it mushroom. Now, one of the reasons that they do that and is that, and this is what I learned very early because I have a background in 10 years at a very large commercial mushroom farm. I knew the economics of growing mushrooms, and growing mushrooms is really expensive. All mushrooms are harvested by hand. In fact, think about it. Have you ever eaten a mushroom that wasn't harvested by hand? No, all the mushrooms in the stores, somebody has to hand pick it. You go out in the wild, you have to hand pick it. I mean, they're all harvested by hand. A large mushroom company is got an army of people to harvest those mushrooms. So in 2022, the USDA stated that fresh specialty mushrooms can earn the grower $4 a pound. Okay, that's great. $4 a pound. He can make a good living at it, make a profit. Now, that's wholesale. And then it has to go to the distributor or whoever else gets the retailer. And again, this is specialty mushrooms. So that's like your shiitake, your oyster mushrooms, your maitake, lion's mane, $4 a pound. Now, if you dry those out, mushrooms are 90% water. 1 pound of dried mushrooms wholesale now is $40 for a pound of dried mushrooms. Maybe some of you, I mean, I'm sure you have. Have you ever been into the supermarket and somewhere along the line there's some little packages of dried mushrooms, and I look at those and I go, okay, there's a Boletus edulis or there's a morel or something. Holy smokes, $15 for 20 grams dried, and I'm like, God, who buys these things? Well, essentially, it is not economically feasible to grow mushrooms in North America for supplement use. It just isn't. Now, there are some herbalists who make their own tinctures, and they've got a local mushroom farmer down the line, a small mushroom farmer. They could go to him and maybe get his seconds and make their own tinctures, which they sell directly to their customers. That could be going on, but in terms of on any scale, absolutely not. So what has happened in our market is that companies now will grow myceliated grain, and they do it on multiple different grains. It could be rice, oats, different grains, and once it's grown through, and it could be 30 days, it could be 40 days, it could be 50 days. Once it's grown to a certain point, and you can look at this and you can see the mycelium in there. There it is, and you can see the grain in there. They will dry it, grind it to a powder, grain and all, and then companies will sell that and call it a mushroom. And it's absolutely not a mushroom. It is mostly grain starch. Now, where this gets to is The U.S. Dietary Supplement and Health Act of 1994 requires that all nutritional supplements must display the plant part on the label. In this case, the fungal part. And a plant part refers to maybe a root, a leaf, flower, fruit, seed. Like you want a ginseng root. You don't want the ginseng leaf. No, if it's echinacea, you want the echinacea flower. So it's super important, and FDA states that mycelium cannot be suggested or implied to be a mushroom. So FDA already has a compliance document on this issue from 1976. So they're saying absolutely they are two distinct stages of the fungal organism. And so when you get to a supplements facts panel on any supplement product out there, they have to tell you exactly. In this case, these products are telling me, okay, it is a mushroom in there. And it will also have other ingredients. What else is in there? And in this case, in the encapsulated product, we've got a vegetable capsule that's in there. And then encapsulation, with almost any encapsulation of a product, they will have, in this case, it was a bit of cellulose and some silicon dioxide and stearic acid. And those often are used as flow agents in the encapsulation process. If you don't want those particular things, don't want to consume them, and there's not a lot in each capsule, but they are there, then you would go to the bulk powder of that particular mushroom, and that's bulk powder in a pouch, and there are no other ingredients there. But the key here is, okay, we can see it's a mushroom, we can see the amount per serving and so on. This is very important for FDA and for the industry. It's got to be right. And sometimes in the other ingredients for myceliated grain products, they will list the grain in there as if it's some other small ingredient, when in fact, no, it's not. It's actually something that should be up in the supplements fact panel because it dominates those products. So one of the things that people need to understand about this is, what are the plant parts of this fungal organism? And this is just a simplified version of a basidiomycete life cycle. And I use basidiomycetes because basically functional mushrooms are primarily basidiomycetes and ascomycetes. And all these definitions come from the glossary of mycology. Basically, a spore is a reproductive body, mycelium is the vegetative body, and mushroom is the fruiting body. So these are three stages or parts, and in commerce, these different stages are sold as nutritional supplements. Now, how do we define quality, and how do we know what we're getting if we're out there buying one of these products? Well, basically, the issue that we're faced with is that we have a lot of supplements and functional foods that are variable, and it's pretty much exemplified by the production of products using the vegetative body stage of this fungal organism, and that's called mycelium, of course, in place of the actual mushroom, which is the fruiting body stage. And so in the mushroom category, it's really led to a complete breakdown of proper labeling. And according to Professor S.T. Chang, who's the father of the medicinal mushroom movement, speaking of quality control, he's been complaining for 20 years. You can't, commercial products, a lot of them are not telling you exactly what's in there. And he talks about the consistency of the extracts, in this case, extracts in terms of overall chemical composition. And actual levels of active components could be standardized on the basis of one or two active constituents. And this is something that we've done at Namex, and that does not mean that we're building these things up. So, oh yeah, in our products, we've built it up so it's mostly beta glucan or mostly cordycepin or some particular compound. No, these are marker compounds that should be in there. And scientific research has identified specific active compounds in functional mushrooms that we can utilize as quality control markers, especially if they occur in sufficient quantities. And that's what's important. Some people say, oh, there's hundreds of different compounds in mushrooms, and how can you just use one or two? Well, that may be true. There's hundreds of different things in any food product, but the fact is there are very specific compounds in food or supplements that science has told us have a beneficial or functional activity. And in mushrooms, the primary functional ingredient is the 1316 beta D glucan. And beta glucans make up about 50% of the cell wall of mushrooms and mycelium. The other compound that we can utilize is ergosterol, and it's present in all mushrooms and all mycelium. It's the fungal sterol, equivalent to our human cholesterol. Ergosterol is measured by the grain industry when it's looking for contaminants. So they will take samples from grain silos and check out their grains to make sure they have no molds in there. So they use ergosterol as a way to see how much fungal matter that they might have in their grain. And of course, they're worried about aflatoxins. Now, the other interesting compound that maybe you've never heard about, but maybe you have, is ergothioneine, which is a naturally occurring amino acid and powerful antioxidant. And mushrooms contain some of the highest levels of all foods. And there's a lot of scientific research around ergothioneine, which have found that it accumulates in our tissues, and we don't manufacture it. We have to get it from external sources, but yet here we do. We have it accumulating in certain of our organs, liver, kidney, and eyes. And so they're even talking about ergothioneine possibly being a vitamin. Other compounds in mushrooms are triterpenoids, especially in polypores like reishi, turkey tail, and also in chaga. We can measure those triterpenoids as well. And then other mushrooms, we can measure cordycepin from cordyceps species. And today, after many years of not having standards, today we can actually measure hericenones, hericines, and erinacines that are in lion's mane. Finally, one of the analyses that we do is for alpha glucans, and alpha glucans are starch and polysaccharides, and essentially that can tell us if we've got maltodextrin in some product, if there's starch or grains in some product. And it's very important to understand that mushrooms and mycelium contain no starch. Some species will have a small amount of glycogen, just like we do for our storage carbohydrate, but mushrooms do not contain starch. And one of the ways that you can easily unmask these myceliated grain products is doing a simple starch test. Now, the test we use is called the Megazyme test, and this is a test that is specific to 1316 beta D glucans, the fungal beta D glucans, which are different than grain beta glucans. This is a much more active beta glucan. So this test is used by scientists worldwide. It was actually published, a peer review of this method in the AOAC International Journal in 2016. AOAC is the organization that sets the standards for testing. Now, we've also used NMR, which is nuclear magnetic resonance, which is a very different method, and it's a very high quality and deep method for looking into any natural products. We've also used it for beta glucan testing, and what we found with using NMR is the results we get from NMR are close to being the exact as the results that we get from the Megazyme test. And we always feel that it's important to be able to validate the methods that we use. Most of these other compounds that we will test for, we can test using HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography. We can test ergosterol, ergothioneine. The key, again, is having a pure standard that you can put into these instruments, and then you can compare that pure standard to the compounds that you're looking for. So we can use it, HPLC for triterpenoids, cordycepin, the different compounds in lion's mane. It's a very important test for the different compounds that we test for. The other thing that we're currently using is what's called NMR metabolomics, and this gives us a very clear picture and a very clear graph of what we should be seeing in a mushroom product. And we start out by using a dried mushroom, so the actual mushroom itself, and we will build our profile from that. And from there, we can test our extracts. How do they look? Are we losing anything? We'll test other products. Okay, what is this product? Is it a good product? Is it not a good product? We can actually define a species ID, extract ratios, plant parts, and adulterants using NMR. Now, this is a reishi mushroom fingerprint that we've developed, and this one uses 5 different compounds, and at the very top you can see we've got our reishi dried mushroom, very high in beta glucans, 47%, very low in alpha glucan, 0.7%, and high in triterpenoids at 0.51% dry weight. Now, when we compare that against our myceliated grain products that are in the marketplace, you can see they are very, very low in beta glucan, and they're very, very high in alpha glucan, which are the starches. And when it comes to triterpenoids, they don't really contain triterpenoids. Pure mycelium has shown that it has triterpenoids, different triterpenoids than the mushroom, and in very, very small quantities. But when you have products that have a small amount of mycelium, like in this myceliated grain products, you will, it is very dilutes the mycelium, so there's absolutely no triterpenoids that show up on HPLC. Now, United States Pharmacopoeia, USP, did a very interesting study of reishi mushroom supplements in 2017, and it was published in Nature. 16 samples of reishi supplements product purchased in the US, evaluated on their bioactive components, including triterpenoids and polysaccharides. Test number 1, calorimetric of polysaccharides using the iodine test. And what they found was that starch was detected in 13 of the 19 samples. They did saccharide mapping of polysaccharides using a PACE test, which demonstrated a lack of beta glucans in 14 of 19 samples. They did GCMS test of polysaccharides and found Ganoderma polysaccharides lacking in 13 of 19 samples. And then a molecular weight test of polysaccharides showed that 14 of 19 samples were inconsistent with the standard weights that should be there. Then they did an HPLC fingerprint for triterpenoids, and they were detected in 8 of the 19 samples. Now, what the results showed, and this is what their conclusion was, that the measured ingredients of only 5 tested samples, 26%, were in accordance with their labels, which suggested the quality consistency of Ganoderma lucidum dietary supplements in the US market was poor, which should be carefully investigated. Now, 3 of those 5 samples were actually Namex reishi mushroom extracts. But the point here is that the United States Pharmacopoeia did this very, very detailed study of reishi products, and most of the products, despite the fact of being labeled as mushroom, were primarily myceliated grain or contained some kind of starch carriers. So what we actually are getting to in the marketplace right now is, how do we label these myceliated grain products? They're not mushroom. Very simply, they are not mushroom, and yet they're being sold as mushroom. Are they mycelium? Well, no, they're actually not even mycelium. They are tempeh, and for those of you not familiar with tempeh, tempeh is a food product. It's cooked soybeans colonized and fermented by fungal mycelium. So if you're eating tempeh, you're eating mycelium. It's an interesting product, the Rhizopus oryzae, and some of these products actually claim that it is a fermented mushroom product. Well, no, it's not at all. It's actually fermented grain that they're selling, because some of them claim on their labels fermented. If you see that, you know for certain this is what you're getting here. The other part of that is, since grain is the integral and dominant ingredient, it should be listed in the supplements facts area rather in other, as is sometimes the case. So in the list of ingredients, the grain of these products should be listed first, because it is the dominant component of these products. And so, is grain an adulterant? Are these products actually adulterated? Well, you know what? If the grain is not being revealed, you would have to consider these products adulterated. And an example of properly labeled tempeh product, and I consider those products to be food products, much like tempeh. Well, the tempeh ingredients are listed by weight in descending order of predominance, and that's the way legally you are supposed to list the ingredients in your food or supplement. All 3 products here and labels list the soybeans first and the fungal culture responsible for the fermentation second. And what's really interesting is that in the European Union, myceliated grain products are considered novel foods and are not allowed in the EU unless they go through an extensive approval process. They're novel foods. So finally, just to give you an interesting little side to the cost of this myceliated grain product that is being sold out there as mushroom. This here is a retail bag of sterile grain spawn. It's organic and non-GMO. It's have a 50% moisture content. There's 6 pounds of myceliated grain in this bag, and they're selling these 6 pounds for $30. Now, there's no difference between that bag. Generally speaking, there may be some that's a little bit different, but for the most part, that's what these companies are selling. And if you wanted to buy this and go, okay, well, I'm going to grow it out even more, you could keep this bag of spawn at home and let the mycelium continue to grow, or you could just harvest it at that point. But this bag is going to cost you 2 cents per gram, because the dry weight of it is 3 pounds. So the retail cost of that, spawn is 2 cents per gram in a dry weight basis. The retail cost for a 60-gram supplement bottle of myceliated grain is $25. So your supplement cost is 42 cents per gram. Now, look, I'll just give you a bit of advice. If you don't mind these products and you think it's great to, and that's a great supplement or something, well, look, buy the spawn, dry it out, grind it to a powder, and now you have a 2-year supply, 2 grams per day for $30. Now, I just want to introduce you here finally to Professor S.C. Chang. He's the father of the medicinal mushroom movement. I met him at all of these different mushroom conferences in China and have had ongoing communication with him. And he's an emeritus professor of mushroom biology, founder of the International Society of Medicinal Mushrooms, author of numerous books and research papers, devoted himself to study of mushrooms since the 1960s, and he was really considered the driving force behind the mushroom industry in China. And his book, published in 1978, Biology and Cultivation of Edible Mushrooms, that was just an amazing book. When that book came out, those of us interested in mushroom cultivation, that was a really important book, and it actually had, of all things, a detailed chapter on medicinal mushrooms. Now, I published a white paper in 2015, and in my white paper, that's where I did beta-glucan analysis and triterpene analysis, and I demonstrated that all of these different products out there in the marketplace were myceliated grain, and there's so many of those products out there. Well, Professor Chang, at the proceedings of the first Chinese Ganoderma conference in 2015, he essentially referred to my paper and agreed that yes, mushroom, mycelium, spore are 3 different concepts. And then he says basidiomycetes are mainly composed of 3 parts, including spore, mycelia, and mushrooms. And he said mycelium is the structural organization of fungal organisms. Mushroom is the fruit body. And goes on to say the medicinal value of fruit bodies has been confirmed. From the medicinal value perspective, basidiomycete mycelia produced using grain as a culture substrate contain a small amount of beta-glucan, a large amount of starch, and a small amount of secondary metabolites, including triterpenoids, sterols, etc. In contrast, fruit bodies contain a lot of secondary metabolites as well as plenty of beta-glucan. Therefore, Professor Chang said that the fruit body is truly the comprehensive biological stage of basidiomycetes, and the Ganoderma fruit bodies have real medicinal value. And this was just basically a confirmation of what I had published in my white paper, and literally changed the industry in the sense that people are now aware of the difference between a product that is made from a genuine mushroom and a product that is made from mycelium that is cultivated on grain and keeps the grain in the product itself. So that's the end of my slideshow today, and I'm happy to have questions right now.
Thank you, Jeff. That was awesome. There's a lot of questions lined up here, and I wrote like 10 down myself.
That's great. Shall I stop sharing right now or leave the sharing on?
Yeah, you can stop sharing, and I'll read you some questions and work through them if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Kind of in no particular order. There's a few questions popping around about mycelium. For this one from an anonymous attendee, has 2 questions. I'll read them both. Number 1, are not arenacenes in mycelium, ? And are not PSK and PSP fermented mycelium products with lots of human DBPC trials? So I think we're talking about fermented turkey tail products on that second.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, PSP and PSK are highly refined products made from 100% pure mycelium, and they're very good, high quality products. The issue that we're dealing with today is not whether mycelium's got value or not. Mycelium has actually got value, not anywhere near as the mushroom. And in terms of arenacenes in Hericium mycelium, sure, the arenacenes are there, but look, if you've got mycelium in a grain product, the amount of arenacenes are going to be minimal. In fact, I would doubt that they're even in there because it's got so much grain starch. And we are able to actually test for arenacenes, and we will be testing for arenacenes this year. And we're going to run a complete panel on all sorts of products, and we are going to demonstrate whether or not those products have arenacenes or not, because you can't just say, oh, I've got a mycelium product and it's got arenacenes in there. You have no idea unless you can do the testing. And not until recently has there even been a standard of arenacenes to be able to utilize. So yes, and look, don't ever think that what I'm saying is mycelium, if this is mycelium versus mushroom. It's not. But you really need to understand mycelium is a poor sister to a mushroom. A mushroom is a basically a biological powerhouse in terms of the compounds that are in there. And I just have one thing to tell you about that. Do you go out there and eat myceliated grain, psilocybin mycelium grain, or do you eat psilocybin mushrooms? Come on.
Okay, thank you. Related question from Stephanie Jarvis. I'll just read it. What about mushroom fruit body plus mycelium? Isn't there benefits to whole mushrooms, fruit body, and mycelium?
Well, Jesus. Look, a mushroom is a fruit body. So what are you talking about? It's like, sure, put mushrooms together with mycelium, but look, make sure it's 100% mycelium. These companies, there's a lot of companies out there say, oh yeah, we've got fruit body plus mycelium. Well, it's like, okay, so you've got mushroom and mycelium. And what they are saying basically, oh, because our myceliated grain at some point produces some primordia, we're going to call those mushrooms, and we're going to say there's mushrooms in this product. All I can say to you is look, if you had pure mycelium and you wanted to blend it with a mushroom, sure, go right ahead. I'll tell you though that mycelium is going to be doing nothing but dragging down the mushroom, because the mycelium simply does not produce the compounds, certainly in any real quantity compared to what mushrooms are producing.
I have a question related to that. Is there going to be a future product where we have a liquid mycelium or a mycelium extract that is not kind of imbued with all that starch and grain?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because look, companies in the United States, if they wanted to, they could set up large fermentation facilities and grow pure mycelium. There's a reason they don't do that. It costs a lot of money to build that facility. And right now they can grow grain spawn really cheaply and make a tremendous profit off of it. And that's really unfortunate. Like I said, buy a bag of grain if you want to, and let it come up to where it starts to grow some little primordia on it or something, and then harvest it, and you've got a 2-year supply.
Okay. So we're going to move backwards now in some of the questions. David asked an interesting one. Can you please address species drift with resulting varying secondary metabolites?
Species drift?
We can ask him to rephrase the question if that helps.
Well, yeah, just explain that, because I'm not really familiar with that concept. I mean, look, one of the things that I will say, which is really important, is a lot of the medicinal compounds depend on the cultivar, especially in a cultivated mushroom. And that's where for example, nutritional value in mushrooms, very different. But in one species, there's a paper out there on lion's mane. They analyzed 20 different cultivars of lion's mane. It's a Korean paper. The actual actives, the hericinones in those mushrooms varied from 1% up to 8%. Think about that for a second. That's a huge variation. It's the same in a reishi mushroom. Depending, I saw a study done, was presented at a Congress back in 2001. They tested 12 different reishi mushrooms. And these are mushrooms coming from different locations, different growers, 1% to 10% triterpenoids. So within a species itself, there is a tremendous variation of the functional ingredients.
Great. That kind of, I think, relates to Riot's question. He said, I'm curious about the cultural, political, spiritual assertions around Ganoderma lucidum, sensu lato, sensu stricto, etc. It seems there's a significant amount of taxonomic confusion in this genus, and all those older studies listing GL, I guess that's the Ganoderma lucidum, it might have actually been different organisms in the same genus. And I find this interesting as somebody that harvests the Ganoderma oregensis here, or other types of Ganodermas. What do you think about that?
Well, you know what? They've done a lot of now that we've got DNA analysis. They've really gone on a deep dive in with Ganoderma and what they and I've got a number of papers on that, and that's got all the DNA evidence. Today, they believe that a Ganoderma lucidum is a European species. None of what has been in China grown as reishi is actually Ganoderma lucidum. They're now calling that Ganoderma lingqi. And that's what I've looked at the data deeply enough. I agree with that. These are all scientists from Taiwan, from China. Again, DNA analysis. I think it's very clear. That's why for our products, we will call it Ganoderma lingqi and lucidum. Now, and look, it creates havoc in the literature because you've got a huge body of literature talking about either Ganoderma lucidum, or maybe it's talking about Coriolis versicolor, which is Trametes. So this is something, well, what do you do? But it is a separate species, and they've proven it on a number, not just DNA, but other macroscopic and microscopic features.
But do you think there's a difference between those different species and medicinal
what they've actually
qualities?
shown is the European species are much lower in triterpenoids. In fact, some people utilize triterpenoids as a marker for between different species, and going, okay, that has a high amount of triterpenoids. This is consistent with a Ganoderma lingqi, or this is consistent with a Ganoderma lucidum. So they say, yes, we can use that as one marker for these different species.
Okay. You had a couple slides I had a question on. You showed the different types of mushroom components, and you had sclerotia in there. What was that, and in what situation?
Oh, that was
Sclerotia?
Wolfiporia extensa.
Oh, okay.
Poria and that's a lot of that is grown in China and utilized in a lot of traditional Chinese medicine. And that's another one of these things out there that you come across, because if you look at the research, so many people will say, for example, with chaga, they'll call chaga a sclerotia. It's not a sclerotia. They'll call chaga a mushroom. It's not a mushroom. Okay, look, we can say in commerce, maybe sometimes refer to it, or we can talk about chaga. Say, oh yeah, the chaga mushroom or something. Chaga is actually a canker. It grows off the side of birch trees. The Enonotus mycelium is inside the tree, and as it moves up the tree, it's a fungal pathogen. The tree is reacting, and it starts to push outward towards the bark, and then you'll get this canker that grows out. Enonotus is considered a canker disease of trees. So what we're seeing is a manifestation of the actual disease. It's not, if you test it, and you look at it, you can look at all of the cinnamon area of a chaga. It's got a very low amount of mycelia in there. It's mostly tissue that has been consumed, and it's just all this tissue there. The only scientist who's ever actually looked at it under a microscope has said that chaga has approximately 10% of mycelia in it. It's not mycelia then. It's not sclerotia. What is it? Well, it's actually a canker. But you don't want to go to market out to a market and say, "Hey, how'd you like to buy this nice canker product that I've got?"
Yeah, I was surprised that you had that in the presentation since it's about cultivation. Is there a cultivation of that
Well,
happening?
I had it in there because basically it is one of the major, um, let's just call it fungal type organisms that is in the marketplace. You cannot grow chaga. Um, they are starting to grow chaga in Finland now by inoculating the forests of because they have woodlots over there. So they have all of these birch woodlots, and they're going to the owners and saying, "Hey, look, if you let us inoculate your trees with this pathogen, you can harvest chaga off of it, and you'll get more money than using it for wood later." And it takes 80 years before it'll kill the tree. So it's like that's what they're doing, and it's kind of interesting. But you're also introducing a pathogen in a greater amount to forests over there.
Yeah, true. Um, Riot is asking about maltodextrin and asking about the process, how it gets into products. It's something to do with dry spraying, dry spraying extractions, or is it something else?
Well, you know what? With a lot of herbal extracts, they are initially in a liquid form, but you need to, if you want to make them into powder, you have to dry them some way. One of the ways that they will dry them is with what's called a fluid bed dehydrator, where you take the liquid and it goes onto a carrier like a maltodextrin, and then it comes out. And if you see products out there that are granulated, oftentimes that's this process where in order to make those granules they need some kind of a carrier material, and that is often maltodextrin. So there are a lot of herbal extracts that have maltodextrin in them. You can also add the carrier, the maltodextrin, to the fluid before it goes into a spray dryer. So but that's something that we don't do. And one of the things that you can always do, and what we do, is we test for polysaccharides and for starches. And so we know if there's ever a carrier that somehow has gotten into, but no, that's not something that we utilize. But a lot of companies will utilize starches as carriers, and it's very common.
Maybe on a related question, you had a chart with different types of mushroom products and how they ranked out for different active compounds. What is exactly, when you call it an extract? There was a 1-to-1 and a 16-to-1. What exactly is an extract, and does it take more than a pound of dried mushrooms to make a pound of extracts?
Well, what we do, and most people think of an extract as, oh, I want an extract, and they think there's a little bottle of liquid. Well, so how we make an extract is you take your dried mushrooms, you put them into, in this case, it's a very huge fermentation tank, but it's just a huge tank of liquid. You put it into the water and the liquid. You take it up to temperature like 80 degree or 90 degrees Celsius. You cook it in there for 3 hours, and then you've got a couple of choices at that point in time. If you want to make a 1-to-1, it goes into that tank as a fine powder. And then what happens is that after you've done the initial extraction through this kind of water, and it's almost like you're simmering the water in there, you then evaporate a large part of that water down to the point where you've got a syrup. And then it's that syrup that you take to the spray dryer. And if you're making a 1-to-1, you just want to load in 100 kilos, and you want 100 kilos to come out at the bottom of the spray dryer. That's what we consider a 1-to-1. And the difference between a 1-to-1 and a concentrate is a concentrate, you can't get 8 kilos in and have 8 kilos out. No, that's a 1-to-1. You have 8 kilos in, and maybe there's only 1 kilo out. So that's an 8 to 1. And so what you have to do is you have to filter out the fiber. So what it is with a 1-to-1, what we're doing is we're processing those mushrooms. Part of what happens is it breaks down the cell walls. It makes it a little bit more bioavailable to us, but you still have the fiber. And when you look at the profile is very close to the raw material itself, because you haven't thrown the raw material away. The raw material is still part of the process, but it has been basically processed to make it into more bioavailable than just eating a mushroom powder. Mushrooms too, you're eating the mushrooms and they're not readily digestible. They're less digestible than most foods.
Yep. Great, thank you. Stephanie has a question or two here. She asks, how does Nemex hold to international food safety standards with products coming out of China? How do you hold these Chinese facilities to standards that hold up to Organic USA, BRCGS standards? Are there certifications, or are you able to police how the fungi are processed?
Well, a lot of people are really kind of like, oh, China, be careful. Man, why don't you look at what goes on in the US in terms of all the products that are contaminated in the US? But to get to your question, look, first of all, our mushroom growers go through the organic certification process. Our extraction plant has all of the certifications necessary to process. It's a brand new plant. The plants in China, everything is new. Everything is brand new in China. All of that old stuff, the factories, everything. These are new factories. So not only do we have a GMP for there, we go through HACCP as well. I'm sure you're familiar with HACCP. And then they get somebody that comes in every year that has to certify them. And then we send in a person from a U.S. Certified laboratory in China that goes in and does an audit on our factory every single year. Now, look, we test for heavy metals. We do a complete pesticide panel. We do a complete microbiological panel. We do that before the product leaves China. When it comes to the US, where our warehouse is, we do another pesticide test, another heavy metals test, and so everything that we manufacture gets tested twice. And look, those are standards in the industry. If you can't meet heavy metal standards, nobody is going to buy that from you. All supplements have to go through pesticide tests. Nobody's going to buy it from you unless it's gone through that testing as well. So in order for us to even market our products, we have to meet those standards. We double test, and we invite any of our customers to test it for yourself to find out if you have any reason to suspect anything. But when it comes to heavy metals, for example, the standards are pretty strict. They're quite low. We meet them all, and we can't sell the product if it doesn't meet the standards.
That's interesting. I have a friend also involved in mushrooms in China, and he speaks glowingly about what it's like there and how advanced they are around mushrooms and careful. And it's kind of interesting to hear that side of the story, because we don't often hear that.
Well, yeah, and you know what? It's funny because I was just looking up the amount of pesticides that are consumed in the world. The U.S. is like something like number 2. China is uses half the amount of pesticides that the United States does. And look, if you don't eat organic food, organically certified food, you're eating a lot of chemicals, period.
Yeah, we're definitely Roundup ready over here.
Yeah, and I just think that, look, a lot of people, because of the original scare in China for that one compound that got into pet food and so on. Yeah, and look, one of the things about China is okay, they find those people, they find them, they charge them, they put them in jail. It's that simple. They do not like, okay, here's a fine because you had E. coli in all your meat and a couple of people died. No, 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 no. No, these people in many cases, not just in jail, they execute them.
Yeah. Well,
They have
still,
they have capital punishment over there. If you break the rules on something like that, I mean, a lot of people die because of you and knowledgeably doing this to your products. You're in trouble, big trouble.
yeah, still is valuable for us as consumers to be cautious and skeptical and ask tough questions.
Hey,
So,
look,
mhm.
I am Mr. Skeptical, period. I question everything.
I got Michael Bug here with a question. Hello, Dr.
Michael
Bug.
Bug. Hi,
Mhm.
Mike.
He wants to know if you ever sell organic mushrooms themselves or just the extracts.
Well, you know what? No, we don't, because it's actually very difficult to. Well, look, actually, there are a lot of fresh mushrooms now that are being flown in from China to the United States. But again, the fresh market, to me, it's so different. You're going to have to go through wholesalers and to retailers, and keeping a mushroom fresh is not easy. And okay, well, what about dried mushrooms? Man, trying to get dried mushrooms and especially organic certified. I used to bring in I brought in a ton of dried maitake once, and into the US. Well, guess what? If it's from China, okay, you have to do a light filth test. Well, light filth, what does that mean? Okay, maybe you have a fly leg in there or a wing or something like that. In an organic product, come on. Yeah, I literally had to destroy 1 ton of maitake mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's like a filth test. Come on, it's an organic mushroom. It's like going out, foraging for mushrooms and going like, hey man, if that's got a worm in there somewhere, nah, it's done.
I have two related questions for you here. One is from Connie Green. Hello, Connie, again. Hey, what do you consume yourself medicinally? She's asking.
What do I consume? Okay, it's pretty simple. First of all, I consume a 5,000 IU's of vitamin D3 every day. I consume one of our products, which is called D2Z, which is 2,000 IU's coming from a mushroom powder, plus 30 milligrams of zinc, and D2Z, yeah, zinc, D. And so that's what I consume. This one of our products, a mushroom product with, we've added zinc. And then the other thing I do is we sell ergothioneine, and we have a product, a retail product. We have two divisions. We have real mushrooms, which is retail. We have Namex, which is wholesale. In the retail line, we have an ergothioneine product. I recommend that to everybody. If you're not taking ergothioneine, start doing it now. Look at the science. The science is deep. It's very, I guess, you know, I just think after I read it all, it definitely looks to me like a longevity vitamin. And they've done studies. A lot of the studies come out of Singapore. There's a researcher there. A lot of the studies are coming out at Penn State from Dr. Beelman. Check out Robert Beelman on the net. A lot of his papers are come up. He'll talk about ergothioneine. It is a fabulous compound. Mushrooms have the highest level of ergothioneine of any foods. Eat mushrooms. You'll get ergothioneine there too, but I supplement with ergothioneine. Those are the ones I do. Ergothioneine, the D2Z. So I'm getting my zinc. I'm getting the vitamin D with that D2Z product, which has 2,000 IU's, and the supplemental 5,000 IU's, you get 7,000. I totally believe in vitamin D too. Vitamin D, man, it is as important as anything.
Okay, thank you. From an anonymous attendee asks, what are the three top fresh mushrooms for improving health or reducing antioxidants?
Top fresh mushrooms.
Mhm.
Oh man, you'd better start with shiitake mushrooms. They are premier mushrooms, not just as a food mushroom, but also as a medicinal mushroom. Um, Shiitake, I would say you could probably maitake or lion's mane, either of those two. One of the mushrooms that I love now is they call it shimeji, and in fact I think it's an oyster mushroom, and they grow them in the bottle culture. It comes out as 100 small little mushrooms. A lot of them are like your little finger or smaller. It's a cluster, and
That was the one in the picture you showed us in the slide, right?
and yes, and I love them that way. Oyster mushrooms that you get, they're big, they're thin fleshed, they're not very tasty to me, but you get these little shimeji mushrooms, and man, you can break them up, throw them in. You don't chop them, you don't do anything to them. You just break them out of the cluster, throw them in, fry them up. They're delicious, and very little processing that you have to do to them. I love bottle culture. Like I also love enoki mushrooms. Fabulous.
What's the species name on that shimeji? Do you know?
I think some of the shimeji is Hypsigus is the genus, but I haven't paid a lot of attention. This particular shimeji I get, which they're calling shimeji, comes from Korea. When I'm in Tasmania and I see it, and it comes in, and it's actually a Pleurotus ostreatus that they're cultivating, and that so they will manufacture a number of grow different mushroom species, many of which they would call shimeji.
Okay. Joy Dutcher in the chat says Hypsigus tessellatus.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Okay. Thank you,
absolutely
Joy.
one of the shimejis.
Okay. Thanks for that. Well, Jay Hadley, I think has a specific twist on an earlier answer, asked about testing for heavy metals, which you've talked about, but was wondering mostly about cultivated fresh mushrooms from China. Do you recommend only organic? Question.
Well, look, that is an interesting question, and I would say, look, it's an interesting question because when I was at the mushroom farm in the 70s, we sprayed chemicals like you can't imagine, fungicides, pesticides, you name it. Penn State at the time had a whole list of the different chemicals that you added at different stages of the crop. It was insane. Today, believe it or not, you can actually get organic agaricus mushrooms, which really shocks me. But would I, a non-certified mushroom from China? Well, they would probably be using some kind of chemicals on it. So I would probably say no. But again, you would have to check the mushrooms that you're buying from your local supermarket, because if you're buying now agaricus, again, they use a lot less chemicals than they used to, so they're probably okay. I still like agaricus. I eat agaricus all the time. I think it's a wonderful edible mushroom. But shiitake, man, if I have shiitake, that's number one for me. And there's always fresh mushrooms in my refrigerator.
Do you have any tips for cultivators to improve or maximize the active compounds in the mushrooms they're cultivating around this, the techniques they use when they cultivate?
Well, it's kind of interesting. This is something for you, Mike Bug, too, because we just did a recent test. We have a license right now from Health Canada to grow psilocybin mushrooms. And so we're growing quite a few different species right now. We're not growing cubensis. We don't really care about that. We're growing other species. We just did some HPLC analysis. I know you did HPLC analysis back, and you published it, I think, in 82, you and Jeremy. And what we found was that, and we tested basically 5 different stages of development. We tested small pins that were maybe, it's a little more than just a pin, but they were like maybe an inch tall. We then tested a long stem, cap still closed, maybe 3 inches tall, cap still tight against the stem. Then we tested the bell-shaped cap, and then a totally open mature mushroom. the psilocybin content went down as it matured. Very, very interesting. So basically, if you the more mature mushroom is has a lower amount of psilocybin, and that could be the same for functional mushrooms. That's something we really haven't looked at, but at the same time, I do want the mushroom to be, larger and mature. I mean, look, you can't harvest mushrooms at their initial stage and make a business out of it. It doesn't work. So what you really want, the most important thing is the cultivar that you use. And the only way you know whether it's good or not is by doing testing. And that's a lot of home cultivators aren't really able to do that.
I had a question for you. There's been over the years a lot of talk about agaricus. I've worked with it personally and found it to be very different in the way it works with water and alcohol, and I make tinctures and extracts. Do you have any thoughts on agaricus?
Well, not really, because again, it's a wildcrafted mushroom, and there is actually a professor at University of British Columbia North that has published a paper on, and what he does is he's in the chemistry department, kind of like Mike Bugh was, and he basically assays all sorts of wild mushrooms, a lot of polypores, and it might be that he did an assay of agaricus in his study. I can check that and send you the paper, but we haven't, because it's not anything that we sell, and because there are so many polypores out there that have very good profiles medicinally, like cheese. What is it? Sometimes with names, I'm like, okay, what was that one? But what is a pinacola?
Let's see. I'm going to say artist conch, but it's the
No, it's not the artist conch.
no,
It's
it's the
and it's one of the most common
pinacola.
of the
Red belted polypore.
yeah, it's the red belted polypore. And look, it has got great medicinal properties, but again, look, I'm not going to go out and wildcraft this stuff just so I can get, I mean, all these others, if it's cultivated, then it's accessible. I mean, we last year we produced 320 tons of our extracts. I mean, whenever we do a batch, it is 1,000 kilograms. I mean, we're really dealing in large amounts. And not only that, look, I've got a book. It's called Icons of Medicinal Mushrooms of China. It's got 270 different species that have at least one scientific paper that says it's got medicinal properties. Think about that for a second. How many mushrooms are you going to take to market and go, okay, it's like, how is this different from the other one? Well, that's why we focus on ones that have been used traditionally and have a lot of science behind them. That's where our focus is. And so these other ones, kind of outliers, but look, people can forage for them, take them home, make up their own extracts. They can make up water extracts very easy of these. And this is one of the things too. Just a lot of people say, okay, try terpenoids in reishi. Yeah, you got to have an alcohol extract to get those out. That's absolutely wrong. No, it's like you will get out most of those triterpenes with a water extract, but some of them do need alcohol to get them out. But it's like, okay, no triterpenoids. Well, why don't you just boil up a reishi mushroom for a few hours and then taste the tea there? It is bitter.
Yes, it is very bitter.
Yeah.
I have one more question, I think, before we wrap. We've gone a pretty good length of time here, and I think it's appropriate. This is a question from John Michelotti, our fearless leader here. Hi, John. John says, "Thank you for the presentation, as do I. He appreciates the deep well of information you shared, and his question is: do you find differences in the amount of compounds within a mushroom, an indoor grown mushroom versus an outdoor cultivated mushroom?"
Wow, that's interesting. And what I would say, John, is that I do not think that it would matter one way or the other, because what we're finding is the key to the medicinal or functional compounds in the mushroom is the genetics of that particular cultivar. That is the key. And that's why we will collect mushrooms from different locations, trying to test them out and see what the amount is in there. And then that might be used to create a cultivar. Right now, just for example, we're collecting psilocybe spore prints from all over. It's a spore print. It's like, okay, we take that, we germinate the spores, we look at different sectors, we pull them out, we create different cultures, we then test them. If we can cultivate them, which we're still working with some of the species that are difficult, then once we get a mushroom there, then we can test it. And it's maybe high, maybe low. We don't know until we have multiple of those particular mushrooms coming from different areas. And that's sort of kind of what we're faced with, and why we like to collect. For example, in the Northwest, we love to collect cyanescens from different locations. And if we can actually get the actual mushroom and grow it out, and look, it's not going to help me so much if I test a wild mushrooms. What stage is it in? Now we know, okay, if it's a mature, it's going to have a much lower content of psilocybin. And we might go, oh, yeah, that's kind of low. Let's look for something else. So there's all these variables. And that's why what we're trying to do with our project is develop a cultivar for these different psilocybe mushrooms, species from Mexico, species from the Northwest, develop something that then we can standardize. So if you want to do research on one of these mushrooms, you drag it in from somewhere in this state and somewhere in that state, and they're totally different. You don't know that. You think they're all the same. No, you really need a standardized material. And that's kind of like going to the research and mushroom research out there, and you look at, okay, what actually were you using as your starting material in your research? You haven't even characterized it. All you've done is you've said, oh, I got a reishi mushroom here from such and such down the road at his mushroom farm, and that's what we use in our experiments. It's like, don't waste my time, really. Literally, it's like, no, you need to characterize this. If I can provide a researcher with a mushroom species that has been profiled completely through a number of different tests, so that we can give them a C of A that says, hey, this is it. It's standardized. It's going to be the same every time you want to use it, because it's a cultivated mushroom of this species. And the most difficult thing in the world is developing a cultivar from a wild mushroom. That's why we only have 25 major mushrooms in cultivation. I mean, it's not like plants. No, it's like cheese. It's difficult. It's a lot of work to get a high quality cultivar. And look, first of all, you want something that actually produces mushrooms. And then you'd like something that produces a reasonable amount of them. And then you want something that also has the right chemicals in it as well. It's a long and interesting process.
Interesting. There's a lot of people just thanking you here in the chat. I see thanks from Stephanie and Ryath, David, John. So I think a lot of people are really grateful for the wisdom that you shared with us today, and the experience. I really enjoyed it myself. So we will have this popped up onto YouTube in 24, 48 hours.
Wow. That's tremendous. Yeah, send me the link.
Yeah, I sure will.
Yeah.
And
look, maybe down the line, a year from now, I can come in and I can give you a update on our psilocybe research. It's very, very interesting, and we'll have a lot more data in a year.
Okay, well, I'll hold you to that, because we do try to do a regular series and include those in our topics. So we're definitely looking for the science of that mushroom. So I think
awesome.
That would be
Well,
fascinating.
Trent, David Wald, thank you very much for inviting me. NAMA's a great group, and I really appreciate being here.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
See you.